Yes, and thank you so much for agreeing to talk to me today. Now, you've just completed your 12-week program with me. So tell me a little bit about what was happening before you worked with me. What were you struggling with and your challenges?
Well, first, it's pretty cool to do this because when I was thinking about doing it, I watched some of the testimonials, and now I'm on that side getting to do it. So thanks for having me. So my story is I did about 10 years of standard American therapy, whatever that means, cognitive behavioral therapy, talk therapy with either licensed counselors, sometimes a psychologist, and actually at one point a psychiatrist. And I learned a lot, but over that time period, and I never really thought about that till I met you because I interviewed you for my podcast, which is interesting. And you said something just as casually as we were getting off that, you know, why did what took so long, or what are you doing for 10 years? And that's the first time I ever thought that, maybe I should be making better progress than this. So I think I learned a lot intellectually, but I didn't learn anything about doing anything, or I wasn't motivated. Maybe I learned and just didn't know. But I suffered with imposter syndrome, feeling not good enough, sort of being a people pleaser and orienting my life so that I got esteemed only when I was making other people happy, which sort of led me to not get my own needs met and struggling with that. But I was aware of all that stuff and sort of knew what was happening, but I just didn't know what to do
Mm,
to change it.
that's right. I think it was very much the how. You didn't know how to get rid of that voice in the head and those negative thoughts and those people pleasing syndromes, which are so common because we're all shaped, by our old programs and patterns. So um, there was a moment just before you committed and you said yes. Can you remember what was going on in your mind then, and what were your doubts or questions before you committed?
Yeah, it's funny because one of the big things I still that we identified, were you helped me identify working with you, was my sort of limiting beliefs around wealth and money, and not just money but wealth. And one of my struggles was, why do I have to pay? I don't want to pay for something because anybody who's charging money for something is trying to take advantage of me. And, you know, there, this isn't really a thing. I'm going to get, I don't know. I just had this idea. For some reason, I didn't mind paying for therapy, mostly because my insurance covered it for the most part. But when it came to doing coaching or something like that, I just felt like I had a huge barrier with spending the money. And so that was sort of what was going on in my head was, how am I going to justify spending money to do something like this when there's a risk of being taken advantage of, or whatever, that you're a con artist or something like that. But what got me was, again, I interviewed you, we talked for a little bit, and you invited me back to do sort of your pre-screening to see if it would actually work, that we would work together. And I just didn't feel like at all like you were trying to take advantage of me. I mean, your sales pitch was almost sort of like, this is what I do. I've got some tools. I've had success. I think I can help you. And then you make the decision. And so I felt really comfortable, and there was no pressure. And somehow that limiting belief softened enough to where I could say, yes, this is something I want to try because I believe that it's going to help.
Yeah, and I think what something I remember clearly, Chris, is being so horrified that you had spent 10 years and you'd spent quite a lot of time that you can't get back, and money, and no one had got you any results. And I think I was so driven from within because I knew I could help you. And I'm wondering whether you had any concerns about, will this work for me, because you'd worked for so long.
Well, yeah, certainly. I mean, I guess to a certain degree, I feel like this process is, a lifelong thing, and I'm never what I've learned, I guess, is I'm never going to be fixed, but now I have a toolkit that I
Mm.
didn't have before. And so the being able to see progress, and I'm not sure if that answers your question exactly, but yeah, that was the most impressive part, is like, I didn't feel like you had a sales pitch, because it was sort of like, oh my God, what have you been doing and what have you learned? What, because it is a lot of time. And, I feel like I'm an intellectual master. I could write out the exercises for all of the different cognitive behavioral chapters in the book, but I didn't have any luck doing it,
Yeah.
or I didn't have that set of tools. And it's interesting that nobody ever really, not to knock sort of traditional American therapy, but nobody ever was held accountable for that. That
Mm.
wasn't an issue. It wasn't, are you getting better? Or there were no metrics, or, you know what I mean?
Yeah, like
Um,
I do, and I think when you sent me quite a long, great, pre-work and information about yourself, and intellectually you could almost explain many of the patterns that you were running and what you were doing, but there was all this intellectual knowledge, but you hadn't been able to apply it and implement it, embody it, and then turn it into forward action, and that was the part that I knew exactly what we needed to do. Anyway, I'm so glad that you did make that decision to invest in yourself. And you're right, I don't. I like to think I'm not salesy. I do this because I know that I can serve people, and I knew that I could help you. And as you knew, I guarantee my results. So tell me a little bit about some of your successes and shifts or insights along the way.
well, I think the a big part of it is the vault and the blueprint for success, and what you call the yellow book. I don't know what the actual title of it is. Is there actual tools and steps, and sort of and very simple. I mean, nothing nothing didn't make sense. Nothing sort of threw me for a loop. You always ask if I have questions, and it's like, no, it's self-evident in your writing or in your videos what to do with these things. But all the topics were the same, right? So I'm familiar with the videos and the orders, and I go, oh, what's this? And then all of a sudden, here's a tool with something that I can learn to do, and then sort of put in my toolbox. So I've always got that as a go-to. Um, and then sort of how to take what you really helped me do at first was take this giant intellectual mess of knowledge and focus it on what I needed to do, sort of what my, and so the work doing values to me. And I've said, I actually did an episode on this on my podcast. I had no idea, I would read the CBT workbook and talk to my therapist and say, oh, I got to come up with my values. And so I'd go 1, 2, 3, they're my values, I'm done. But what you made me do is sort of go back through multiple iterations and sort of think about the words and the semantics, and pull those things apart to the point where I ended up with a list that was kind of similar to my first list, but new things came up. And then the whole idea of shadow values and all of that. But now, because I put so much work into it, I've memorized it. I mean, it's a toolkit where I can say, if I'm sitting, I don't know, playing with my daughters or something, and somebody starts to get in a fight, whereas before that would trigger a whole belief and response about, it's my responsibility and all this. And now I feel like that my values fly up in front of me first and go, okay, check how you're feeling against this. And then I've got 2 or 3 other tools on how to react instead of just reacting with anger or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So the combination of sort of you sort of not really forcing me, but sort of, enforcing these key ideas that you sort of have to do first, and then highlighting the tools that will go along with that. And now I just, it's becoming my standard response, instead of sort of a negative emotional reaction that would have happened
Mm.
before.
Because you were pretty hard on yourself, if I remember too, and doubting yourself, and that was quite a big challenge for you at the beginning. Even I guess understanding, what was going on and how to change the negative voices.
Oh, yeah, exactly. It's funny because when you say that, I'm like, yeah, I was. And that was just like 3 months ago. And now it doesn't even seem like that I'm the same person, because again, there's this moment if there's this space that you've helped me create before, and then again, I know what I can do, and I don't always do it well, but I always just, I would get in arguments with my counselors or therapists and sort of say, you're telling me to do this thing, but I'm telling you, by the time I think of that thing to do, I'm already a mile down the street of this old thing that I do. And you know what I mean? There's automatic. And again, you taught me about neuroscience and sort of why that is, and pulling in all of those different. I needed the explanations, right? I got to have the information as a former scientist. I got to have the information, which you always provide. So putting it in a neuroscience context made me feel better. I don't know how it was.
Hey, you're a great intellectual. You're a researcher. You've done incredible things, and part of it is some of the processes that I taught you to. I actually took you through going beneath your language and the surface of your intellect, so that you could actually feel and see, I guess, from behind the scenes what you were doing. And I know we worked on a couple of beliefs that were quite massive to shift in our work.
Yeah. Well, like the not good enough, and again, and really, that's for me the feel. You just said feeling, and that's the thing that I think was missing, was that there's and I don't know, you said something to the effect of, you can't think your way out of a problem, or I don't know what it is, the quotes, you can't use your mind to change your mind, or anyway, somewhere along the line, I've started to believe that it's action and things that you do is actually going to do the rewiring of your brain, and that these things take time, and it's about building habits. And I, I never would have believed that 3 months ago. I would have said that's BS. It doesn't work like that. And yeah, now I've sort of switched gears 100% and want to try all these, even daily affirmations and just gratitude and journaling and scheduling and all those things. I mean, they work. And
Funny, isn't it? Simple, but they do.
well, and it took you to sort of just not convince me. I mean, it's not like you were trying to sell me something, but somehow in the process of us working together, I've opened up to say, well, I mean, Mandy is saying this is what works, and this will work for her and solve these other people's problems. So who am I to resist that?
Yeah, and it's like, your podcast. You interviewed me originally for curiosity, but it's about us asking ourselves better questions. So it was helping you in many ways ask yourself a better question that would take you deeper, so that you could become aware. And only with awareness can we change. So my work, for people that often wonder what exactly is it all about, we work at the subconscious level, which is the part of our mind that runs our life, and the part that gives us the most challenge, because most people are out of rapport. That's where their patterns originate from. Our subconscious is the storehouse of our memory, and it acts according to what it thinks is best for us from our old programs. And you were just simply out of alignment with your wonderful, creative, overthinking head, and a disconnect with what you were feeling, thinking, doing. So it wasn't actually translating into always the right doing. So tell me how, and this has impacted in your life. I mean, we know you had a bit of a people pleasing, and you weren't giving yourself permission to do the things that you love to do. So tell us a little bit about the differences and what's happening now.
Well, I mean, I still sort of struggle with that because it's such a long-term thing. And I think I've finally accepted that, it took me 40 years to build these habits. They're not going to break overnight. And really, if they did, I'd sort of question whether or not they were going to stick, right? Because it's going to take more training with the neurology. But I do have sort of an automatic response now to go. It's like I feel like Freud or something. If something happens, if my wife gets angry, or anything that happens that would sort of throw me off and make me think it's my fault, and or whatever. Now I sort of go, well, what is this all about? What's going on with this person? What's going on with me? And somehow this space has been created, and that just having that space to be able to decide if I'm going to react like I used to react, or if I'm going to try something different. One of the tools you've taught me, it's giant. And most of the time I'm able to sort of stop and implement, something I've learned. I can't think of a good example. But that's really changed, and it's softened me up, to being just so reactive because, 6 months ago, my initial reaction to most things in my household, especially with COVID, was this is my fault. I should have done something. I've already screwed up, but how can I make it better? And then I would say, well, I shouldn't have played mandolin for an hour or whatever. And that's why this person is upset. And that whole thing would just, and it would ruin my day. Right. And now it doesn't ruin my day, which is an enormous victory in and of itself. And, and I'm even able to sort of help my kids when they start going, we have things, issues or whatever. And I can sort of say, I wonder if they're doing this, or my wife, which is awesome. So, I mean, it's a completely different way of living. And it's really hard to believe. It's hard for me to think back like 4 months ago and look at how different I just approach day-to-day activities or whatever.
Mm,
It's awesome.
great. So what else has it impacted like your relationships, never mind with your family, but yourself? Tell me a little bit about the difference that it's made on, how you feel and your time and the relationship.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. This is the worst part. It's almost sad to admit. I'm able to believe my family, and people. I used to, like with the sales, feel like I'm always getting sold something. I always believed that people had an agenda. And this is really weird. And what it was my agenda, right? If somebody was giving me a compliment or, saying whatever, I would just think, what does this person want from me? But now understand that that's about me, right? That's my people pleasing thing. I'm trying to figure out what they want from me so I can give them what they want from me, because that's what I do. And so, my day-to-day interactions with people, I believe what they tell me. And that's just, which again is funny, but not having to be on the offense has freed up time for me to sort of understand that I don't have to do that. I'm okay. You know what I mean? So I see the results of not people pleasing, and that is evidence that I don't have to people please, because the results are going to be the same. And then I have energy left over because I'm not having to do that.
Mm,
And it's like it's starting to cycle to the point where I have extra energy left over, and now I can use that energy to focus on the things that, I would want to be doing to get my needs met. Which again, like with my wife, she's told me, I want you to go play music, go play music. But I didn't believe her, right? I thought she had some agenda. And if I did this, I was going to get
mm.
punished later. Anyway,
Uh,
so it's funny how this, you turn a dial over here, and then all these needles over here change.
it
So
does
it's
happen.
like compound interest.
Yeah. When we clean out our old patterns, it's bizarre because they're hidden and they're unseen, yet they're incredibly powerful. And I know this, from my life with when I, had challenges, some of them similar to you, we
Yeah.
have different experiences and presenting problems, but fundamentally they all come down to our wounds from our past that we unconsciously or consciously took on. And often we fight them, as you were doing. Most of my high achievers fight and argue, and what we resist persists because they don't know any other way. I used to do it admirably, fight and argue, or people just put the lid on them, and that doesn't work either. But when we are brave to open up the lid, have a deeper look, it's like, oh, we can just change that now and let that one out, and transform the energy into forward action, and to give you more energy, because it's exhausting, isn't it, arguing and fighting with yourself.
It is. And that's where I sort of realized, because you've used that sort of, language before about energy, and words have energy and all these things. And so I made a little space to say, okay, maybe this is true. And again, it turns out you're right. And so that energy, to change a negative behavior or to reduce a negative behavior, really, I'm sort of living evidence that it does create new energy that then you can use. And so again, this thing, but I never had the experience of free energy or found energy, you know what I mean? Or and 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 I didn't even realize it was happening. But that's real. I mean,
Yeah.
that's something that I can use and you can see, and it feels good, and that sort of encourages you to keep going. And I don't know.
Mm.
Whereas again with traditional therapy, never,
Yeah.
even with EMDR, which was pretty cool stuff, it
Mm.
would just sort of end and stop. There was no application through time or something.
Yeah. And hey, we are energy, and energy cannot be destroyed. It can only be transformed or transferred. So, fundamentally, the work I do helps you transform the energy of an old belief, which is heavy and stuck, and we fight with it, and free it up into something positive and focused so you can create your future from the now, not the past, which, as we know, never gets us the results that we want. Um,
Right.
Tell me, what else are you doing differently now? Or you said you were feeling better. What else is changed for you, and what are you doing as a
Well,
coach now?
I mean, I don't feel nearly as guilty when I do things for myself. I mean, even if you know, when I originally started meditating, which was, I don't know, I tried before, and I sort of started trying a few weeks before working with you, um, and I started doing it in my car because it was just easy, and I used to feel guilty about it, like, oh, I should be um, starting my errands now, or I should be going and doing this now. I shouldn't be taking this 20 minutes for myself. And now I look at it as just like, I don't want to say I don't care, but I understand the benefit of it, and I've put it in a much healthier context.
Hmm.
You know, instead of thinking about it as something to be guilty about, and that's sort of, again, well, it's like, well, if I can do this and not feel guilty about that, can I do this and not feel guilty about that? And so that started to trickle up. And sort of my next big goal is, um, using your tools, is scheduling specific tasks that me time tasks into every week. And then I realized, and I think you said this before, if you don't, I would block out like 3 hours if I could get that much, and I'd say I'm going to do fun stuff. But then I wouldn't do anything because it was not explicit enough. So now I'm sort of like, sit down and work through this song and learn these chords, for 30 minutes.
Mm.
And those are much more doable. I don't know, it's so stupid, but it makes a huge difference in whether or not I'm actually going to
Yeah.
achieve that goal for the week.
Because by nature, your past career was a researcher. You're an intellect. Yet you're also very creative and musical, and you've got a few ideas and projects in writing. So tell us what's in store next for you in the future. What's it opened up for you that you can actually see coming to fruition now?
Yeah, one of the things that I was doing before we met, well, I said I have a podcast and we did interviews, and I was sort of playing around.
Mm.
And then you've encouraged me through all this work that we've done together, is to, well, not, I mean, I mentioned this as a goal in passing, and I think I saw it and said, well, this is something you should do, is to monetize that. And so now I've got a whole new lease on what I'm doing, in order to work toward the goal of trying to generate some revenue and to write a book. And I mean, I've got all the steps all planned out. And it's all really perfect timing, because I've been doing this as a hobby for so long that now I've got the skills. And now all I have to do is some very minor tweaks to keep the machine going in the direction that I want it to go now, which is awesome
And
for
I
my.
believe, if it's all right, I share, you and your wife have a really cool goal, a big long-term plan, something to do with a boat. Tell us a little bit about that one, because when
Well,
we,
yeah. So one of my job now is, to try to figure out a bunch of different ways to generate passive income, so that my wife can quit her career, which she's in American healthcare and
Mm.
is very frustrated with it. to sort of buy her time to have a life. And one of the things I do is real estate. But then the other thing that I saw as an opportunity, which you helped me see, is what we call monetizing my brain, which is hard for me to still kind of say out loud, but I do have a plan to try to generate additional passive income through that vehicle, so that, yeah, so that eventually she can quit her job, we can sell the house, and we can buy a sailboat and live on it. Which I think 3 or 4 months ago seemed like it could be a fantasy, but now it seems more like, yeah, this is something that we're going to do.
And now you're
I gotta
sharing
get,
it. It's so much better to share our goals out loud because they become more real. And I know you'll get there for sure. And I think lastly, one of the wonderful things is being a father, the tools that you have, which you get to keep, are transformational in so many ways because you're able to use them with your kids because you have a greater understanding of how humans function and operate.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's my, when I do my podcast and when I think about the book and these tools, I think about my kids and sort of like, what the old me would have said, how did I screw them up already, and what should I have been doing when they were younger, because they're three of them are older. But now it's more like, how can I help them at 20 do something that I wasn't able to start doing until I was almost 50. And if I can deliver it to them as an audience, then maybe it'll work for other people too.
Yeah, that's to me is what I think one of the greatest gifts of working on ourselves, being brave, getting self-awareness and self-mastery, is that then we can be an even more impactful and influence on the next generation, which is so important. So what would you say
I
to
hope.
someone else that was stuck? Maybe let's hope they haven't been that, doing 10 years of therapy, but what would you say to someone who is basically stuck in their life and not quite sure what to do in regards to?
Yeah, I mean, well, the easiest thing for me to say would just be, just don't be stupid and do it. but that doesn't help, right? I mean, so what I think you have done for me, and I think we've established that I was sort of a cynic and maybe resistant and had some money issues, and it was very difficult. It's difficult for me to get to accept help for anything. But even though, oddly enough, therapy was okay. But anyway, um, I think your story, with the triathlete and all that, and which people can read about, and they probably will have read about it by the time they're thinking about working with you, is absolutely fundamental. I think one of the things that therapy lacks is personal experience. And I had most of my therapists actually would tell me, you don't have any real problems. I'm used to working with people that are beaten and abused and raped, and and that's the kind of problems I help them with. Not that crowd, that school of thought doesn't have the skill set to work with regular people, and potentially high achieving people. But you went through fixing yourself, and I think had the mindset during that of remembering it. And then, I don't know, I'm putting words in your mouth, but then came out of it and sort of said, well, I've learned all this stuff, and then lots of other people need this help. Why don't I just do it? And to me, that's exactly where you want to come from. I don't think people need to get hung up on credentials or knowing whether or not it's going to work. I mean, you have a money back guarantee. What, you have nothing to lose, and the potential to work with somebody who has at least been through something similar. Um, my only advice against potentially working with you, which would you do initially anyway, is assessment of fit. I could see where there might be some people that have different sets of problems, but for anybody who has shown any interest in their personal growth and has some awareness of that material, um, and is not making progress, I would definitively say that you probably can help them make progress where they have failed before.
Yeah, thank you. And look, I've been doing this for 13, 14 years, but probably longer unofficially. And it's so important to me that we're a good fit. when I was going through my difficult time, I had so many experts, and I totally get what it's like when we A, asked for help. That's the hardest step. And B, we must find that person that we're okay to connect and trust. So that's why I always have a conversation with someone first, no obligation. And one thing I do just want to clarify in case someone picks up on this, I actually don't generally offer a money back guarantee. My guarantee is if you get to the end of your program with me and you can honestly say you haven't got value and results, and there's a few parameters we measure, I will continue working with you
Oh yeah.
no longer than the same amount of time. I don't actually believe in money back guarantees because I think some people have secondary gains, but I do offer that as a guarantee, which I'm very, very, very rarely had to do. But I know that what I do works. It's all backed by neuroscience, scientific research. And the more that, we look in the brain and see what's actually happening, the more it's being endorsed, and the tools and techniques work, that I have.
Well, yeah, and that's what's cool is all that stuff. I mean, it's almost, I feel like you explore that almost you would be doing it anyway, right? It'd be like a hobby for you just to satisfy your curiosity about how all that stuff works. And so it's cool to not have just one school of thought
Mhm.
sort of shoved at you. You're pulling things from
Mhm.
everywhere. And for me, I appreciate the scientific literature part.
Yeah, some
And
people, but
neuroscience.
ultimately, I think we all, I like to know and understand to a certain level, and then we have to turn it into practice. But I'm always learning. I'm obsessed a bit like you with learning and being my best. So I'm always learning, studying. I have coaches and looking at cutting edge and hanging around with amazing people so that, I can grow even more than my clients so that I can always take them to the next level, wherever that is for them. But anyway, it's been a pleasure and a privilege working with you. I know we're going to keep in touch, and make sure you keep in touch with us too. And when you publish that book or whatever, let it, shout out to the community, and maybe we'll have a conversation again when it's out there, and we'll see what's happening in another 6 months' time, Chris. So thank you
That
so
sounds
much.
great.
Awesome, great.
Yeah,
Okay, thank you so much.
it's my pleasure.